Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the library. I'm Caroline Butler-Bowden and the State Librarian. It's so beautiful to see so many familiar faces and new faces in the auditorium tonight. Of course, the library is a place for readers, writers, creatives, researchers, and indeed architects, for curious minds, for exploring ideas. We meet tonight in the library's auditorium. Many of you, this may be your first visit here. It's built into the very sandstone bedrock of Sydney, and I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respect to elders past and present, and indeed acknowledge any First Nations people amongst us tonight. So directly above us is the grand Mitchell reading room, and you will have seen it in our new video. It's full of students and readers and writers still working away till 8 o'clock tonight. And next to us is the Governor Marie Bashir reading room, also full of activity, with lots of people accessing our collections and so much more. We're quite literally in the middle of the living and breathing heart of learning in Sydney. And I'm so pleased to welcome you all here. Tonight is a special night, both professionally and personally. A conversation about and a launch of Glenn Murcutt Unbuilt Works. Professionally, I'm particularly delighted to host you. The library is an important place for many things, including the practice of architecture and the archives of many of our leading architects of the past and our living architects. Glenn's collection is one of those. The library holds an extensive archive, including every drawing, he told me 2 days ago, and plans, obviously, for his unbuilt projects as well. The library's been collecting Glenn's architectural drawings since 1985, and the collection holds records of all his significant projects from 1962 onwards. And I believe from Glenn every single sketch he's ever made, over 100,000 drawings. For each project, the collection includes Glenn's sketches on butter paper and yellow trace, key elevations and sections, and detailed construction drawings, allowing researchers to understand the concepts and ideas as well as how the buildings work. The drawings are often complemented by files of correspondence and building specifications. The highlights, of course, include things like the Arthur and Yvonne Boyd Education Centre, Riversdale, designed in collaboration with Wendy Lewin and Reg Lark. The Short House in Kempsey, 1974, the Simpson Lee House in Mount Wilson, 1994, and the Australian Islamic Centre in Newport in Melbourne in 2018. The library continues to collect Glenn's drawings and papers every few years to keep the collection up to date. And what a privilege it is to hold such a collection of one of the giants of architecture here in Australia and globally. Few architects change the course of their profession and their discipline, and Glenn is one of these. I'm really grateful to our curators and librarians tonight. If you didn't see them earlier, Anna Durnley, Anne Hocking and Elise Edmonds, who are sharing the collection in the Glass House. At Glenn's request, we have drawings of the Short House, Riversdale and the Simpson Lee House on display. I also thank special donors of the architecture program at the library. It's one that we are building, and I'm grateful that Penelope Seidler, Cecilia Clark are here tonight. And finally, tonight is personally important to me. As many of you know, I am the daughter of an architect. I have spoken much about this, and a former curator and writer on architecture and urbanism. I'm really committed to what we can do here in the field of architecture, and excited about the future. I worked with Glenn many moons ago in 2009 when I ran the Museum of Sydney. We worked with Lindsay Johnson, welcome Lindsay, and others on a Murcutt exhibition, Architecture for Place, that then toured, all over the world. And I learned so much through that process of just working, over very many days on that exhibition. 2 days ago, we had one of the most memorable afternoons I've had since I took on this role in November last year. Several of us got together, looked at some of the plans, spoke to Julie Power from the Sydney Morning Herald, and the story is in there today. And I suppose we talked about the value of collections, of architecture as living reference collections, the importance of treasured institutions such as this that can make collections accessible to students and researchers. It's also both professional and personal for the library tonight, because we remember Daniel Murcutt, Glenn's son, who worked here at the library for 37 years. He worked really closely with the manuscripts collection, and he's thought about every day in the work that we share. He was very greatly loved and is very greatly missed by the whole team here. And I want to honour the fact that we have Kathy Murcutt, Daniel's wife, and Lucas, his son, joining us tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to stage this tonight. To you, Glenn, such a great friend of this institution, and to you, Nick Sissons, for writing and publishing this clever and inspirational book. I'd also like to thank Tim Horton, a friend over many years. We met a few months ago in my new post and talked about the opportunities of presenting architecture here, and tonight is one of these occasions. We look forward to many more. And before I hand to our excellent chair tonight, the wonderful Laura Harding, I'd like to add that today is a special day because it's Glenn's 88th birthday. So happy birthday, Glenn. He's been working all day, he tells me, and I think it demonstrates how hardworking you are that he's sharing his birthday by talking to us all tonight. I think there is a promise of a drink on the rooftop after. But welcome, Laura, and welcome to the stage, Glenn and Nick. Thank you very much.
Thanks for all coming. Nick and I are quietly terrified, but we believe we're in very safe hands here. I would also like to begin by acknowledging country and just be grateful to be gathering on beautiful Gadigal land tonight. I'd also really like to thank the State Library of New South Wales and particularly Carolyn Butler-Bowden for being such important friends and allies of architecture, and we really need them. And of course to thank Glenn for agreeing to spend his 88th birthday with 250 of his closest friends. Time is really precious and short, so we're going to just launch in, but I will just let you know that we will spend the last 15 minutes taking questions from the floor, so be ready with your questions. We will have people with mics. I'll give you some warning so you can flag their attention. There'll obviously be lots of people trying to ask questions, so if you can keep your questions really tight. It's not the time to try out your TED Talk. If I see any of those starting up, they will be ruthlessly policed. So we're of course here to mark the launch of this really important publication, Unbuilt Works, that Glenn and Nick have put together. Glenn, I guess Unbuilt Works are a really interesting part of the oeuvre of an architect, and there must be really mixed feelings and conflicting emotions when you start to look through the projects that didn't quite make it off the paper to reality. I'm just saying, it must be conflicting emotions when you look through Unbuilt Works and things that didn't quite make it to reality.
One becomes quite philosophical about these things because most architects have quite a lot of projects that did not proceed. For various reasons. Being in council for too long, can't wait long enough. The budget has gone through a great problem because building costs rose 17% in 6 months. These sorts of things are all things that cause these buildings to not proceed. And of course one loves to see the buildings completed. There's been a huge effort put into every work. There's a total immersion and a dedication to each of those projects. But when Nick first came to me and suggested this as an idea, I thought to myself, it's probably a very good idea so long as it's just not a coffee table book, that it needs to actually have some depth in it, backing through discussion. Why is the building so? The idea of a young architect that's curious. And remember, curiosity is very, very important as an element in our lives. Thoreau had things to say about curiosity. He thought that life was basically over once you lost your curiosity. And I think that's very true, that a curiosity does give that wonderful quality of looking behind what is really at face value sitting there. And I must say that to give a book that not only gives the original drawings, but also gives some of the initial sketch designs and also a discussion is very important. And at one level, one is of course disappointed that the project does not proceed. Of course it's disappointing. But on the other hand, you know, I've been very lucky because there's always been a waiting list, and I've always had other clients that are able to come in when work has not proceeded. I also have had the case where a work has not proceeded and the client has sold the land to a developer from another nation at a very great profit, and rings me 12 months later after I've designed the house and abandoned it and say, look, you're ready to build that house. And I said, what house? And he said, the house that you designed 12 months ago. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I've bought the land back and we can build the house. So it's thrown me into chaos, into terrible chaos, because I can't easily do that. But it's one of those things that it's wonderful that now Nick has done this to get it. I had the concern at the beginning that there was a sort of a slightly, is it going to have a slightly fake quality? It's not real, but the reality is it's like a photograph. And it's like any perspective that one does in presenting to a client. It's no different to a perspective, but it's much more realistic. And even to the point where in some of those projects, Nick has had the site photographed and the house is sitting on the site that it was designed for. I think that's wonderful. So for me, it's been a reward.
Nick, I'm imagining the person who's you in 100 years' time and about to do the Unbuilt Works of Australia's leading architect in 2124, and I suspect they'll be attempting to wrestle with a BIM file on an ancient computer and clicking through a PDF book. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about what arrives after you hand over the request slip at the desk upstairs and what greets you.
Well, it's the most wonderful experience. You hand over the little slip. Well, first of all, there's a catalogue of works, and you kind of, in Glenn's case, there were 306 projects to look at, and we met and we chose, I think, a short list of perhaps 6 to 10 projects. So you come to the library and you fill out the little packing slip, PXD 1042/779, and then you've handed over. And the very helpful people here at the library then say, right, come back in about 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and we'll have the drawings ready. So there's a lovely little pause point where you pop upstairs, pop into the cafe, have a kind of a sandwich or something, and then come out. And by the time you come back, there's a big stainless steel trolley and these giant folders full of drawings. And they're so big, they take up kind of an entire table in the library. So you've got to hog a whole table. And that sort of sense of trepidation it's quite remarkable, because you think, gosh, what's inside here? It's going to be fantastic. And it's a real physical act, actually. You need to sort of pick up one edge and kind of walk 2 steps and then put the other half there, and then suddenly there's a pile of drawings. And it's, as I mentioned the other day, it's like archaeology. So there's sort of different layers that you get through. On the top, there's usually a white folder. And in the white folder, there's A4 correspondence, some faxes, some letters, perhaps some kind of product literature, maybe a letter from the council, and you can put that at one side. And then there's kind of the chunky layer, which is sort of like the Jurassic period, and that's all the sketches. And they're all in butter paper, generally A2, A1 sketches. And honestly, there'd be 2 inches thick of drawings. And that's really the interesting journey. So you sort of start looking through the drawings, and there are tracings of the site plans and some initial sort of ideas. And as you go, the ideas start to firm up, and different kind of plans start to emerge, relationships start to be established. And then the sections appear. So suddenly we're thinking about light, we're thinking about prospect, we're thinking about refuge, and all these other elements that come in. And over time, as you go through and through, the design gets more and more resolved. And then you get to the bottom layer, and that's where the diamonds are, because that's the set of drawings which have been done on film, where every single idea that's been kind of generating is brought and condensed down into a final project. And those are the drawings we use then to build the computer models and to bring these things to life. So it's a wonderful experience. I would invite anyone to come and do it here at the library. It's a fabulous experience. I counted, I think I did 80 different slips. So I did this 80 times. And I also went through some of the built work just to find relationships between projects to understand that as well. But it was a wonderful experience. It took 5 years, by the way. This is over 5 years, and it was my indulgence. It was just wonderful. I'd come in on Saturdays and Sundays. It was just such a pleasure.
Joy. Glenn, of course these drawings form the really significant part of this book, but you make the incredible admission in the text of this book that when you left Sydney Technical College, you thought you couldn't draw. And this astonishes me. I can't believe there was ever a moment when Glenn Murcutt couldn't draw. So I'm wondering if you could tell us how you taught yourself to draw and about the significance of drawing for your sort of searching and discovery in architecture.
I, on the whole, have lacked confidence in a number of areas in architecture, but knowing them, I've worked on them very hard. And drawing was one of them. At university, for example, I would do a plan, but when it came to doing perspectives, I simply could not do them. I could do them in a way, but I mean, it was almost like a childlike drawing. And rather than submit that, I would spend hours because I was quite good at model making. And so every design, pretty much, I submitted not only the plan, but a model. And I had many models that came to the university, and they certainly were wonderful ways of learning through models. It's a wonderful way to learn. But one must learn to think three-dimensionally. And by the way, that's becoming very quickly lost with the advent of the computer. I've tested it and have found the ability for many students today to think three-dimensionally. They're becoming fewer and fewer. And the reality is drawing allows you to express the three dimensions. And I decided I had to learn to draw. And I started looking at the drawings of Corbusier, of Aalto, and I started to realise there's some very simple techniques. And then I had a very good friend who came from Poland. His name was Andrzej Ciekawy. And he was a year ahead of me at university, but I made friends with most students from the year ahead. And that allowed me to delve into a year ahead of me all the time. And Andrzej taught me to draw, and he taught me to draw people in an animated way. And it released me. It was absolutely fantastic. But then I received in my early practice an award that gave me a round the world air ticket and some money besides. And that allowed me to meet the great architect José Coderch from Barcelona. And the thing that also released me was the anxiety that I had that was starting to cripple me. I knew what good design was, But I started to realise I didn't know how to do really very, very fine work. And then Kadirk, this great architect, he was so happy I had written to him. He said, most people just come to the door these days and knock on the door and expect to see me. And he said, at least you had the gentlemanliness of writing to me. And I wrote back, and he wrote back to me. He said he'd be very pleased to receive me, and it was wonderful. But the thing that he said to me, he said, you know, I must tell you, I'm 62, and with every new project, I am very, very anxious. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic to hear. Such an amazing statement from such an incredible architect, that I realised that anxiety was an integral part of not knowing where one is going, but it gives the platform with the confidence that you'll find a way. So that's where I started to learn the whole process in architecture was that not of creativity, but was that of discovery. Any work of architecture that exists, in my opinion, and any work of architecture that has the potential to exist, is there simply to be discovered. It is not created. We do not create as architects. The process through which we discover has a level of creativity in it, but the process itself is that of simply discovery. So drawing, it all came together with the confidence, with Kadirk, and also the earlier years of learning as well.
Of course, the influence of great architects, but also your learnings in architecture began much earlier in childhood through the towering influence of your father. I'm wondering if you could just talk to us a little bit about the things that your father had taught you in early life and how they've led to the way that you create and design architecture.
Yes, well, this will be to some level apology to those of people who are very close friends that know all these stories. So they will be repeated, and I'll try and get through them as reasonably quickly as I can for those who have heard them many times before. At the age of 13, I loved buildings. And my father brought in, and had been bringing in, architectural record from the United States. He also brought in Architectural Forum. He was so interested. He was a builder, but had a great love of architecture and had a great respect for the occupation. And loving buildings as I did, from very early childhood, he used to bring home from the joinery shop all these blocks. And I used to put these blocks together, and together with a battery and a light and some copper wire, I'd light the interiors of these places, and they'd charge my parents a penny to come and see the house at night time, turn the lights off and see inside, and get down on the floor and look inside. And so they gave me a penny for looking into these buildings, and gave me a lot of encouragement. And then when we were building houses, I had to go down on site and deal with levels and understand how you assess landform and all sorts of things. This is at the age of 13. But came one issue in 1949, if I'm correct, was the work of Mies van der Rohe. And it was the Farnsworth House. And he said to me, I want you to read this, and I want to discuss it with you when you've read it. And I read it, and I understood quite a lot of it, but not everything. And so I was questioned from beginning to end, and I didn't get all the answers right. And he said, okay, read it again. And I had to read it again until I got the answers to his questions. And what he was doing was making me understand more than just a building up off the ground. Why is it off the ground? What are the conditions that allow this to have glazing right on the facade? And is it reasonable? Think about this. I want you to tell me what you think about this. Now, these were sort of difficult questions as a child, but he also did not give us pocket money unless we had
several things. One was ask a good question. And my brother, I'm the younger brother, I remember I would have been 15, he would have been 12, and he asked my father, what's the difference between the iron curtain and the bamboo curtain? And that gave him 10 shillings, which was very amazing. And if we'd learnt a piece of music without being asked, that was another 10 shillings. Or if we went out and cut the grass in the lawn, that was another possible 10 shillings. But it was at his discretion as well. But what I realised later in life, all of this was also to display to us as children how much he knew. And he did. He read incessantly, even though he left school at the age of 11 and rode to Burke on a push bike and took up shearing in Burke. He learnt immensely. He was absolutely a self-taught person, but he wanted to convey these things to us. I must say that the Mies van der Rohe house, and then came the Philip Johnson house, and then later came the Kecks, then came the Weiss brothers, and then Frank Lloyd Wright. And by the time I was 18, I knew pretty much the work of all these people. But the thing that remained in my head was the work of Mies van der Rohe. And at the end of reading all this article, he said to me, I want to tell you one thing about this house. It may well turn out to be one of the great houses of the 20th century. But he said, you wouldn't want to live in it. And I said, why is that? He said, there's no place to be in it. And of course, what I learnt many years later, the importance of not only prospect, and of course the Farnsworth house is almost all prospect except for the toilet and the shower. It is very little refuge. And not to have that refuge, that exposure to the outside, is not comforting. And I learnt that. And then I went on another travel grant and met Craig Ilwood. And Craig said to me, and I'm still in the Mies answer, so we'll only get a few answers tonight, questions tonight, Laura, all those questions. And Craig took me to this house, and I said to him, I've admired your work for a long time. He said, I'm surprised. He said, I must tell you, I'm known as one of the three blind Mies. And I said, I'm surprised by that. He said, well, I'm old hat now, so it's very nice for you to come here. So I started questioning him about the house with the glass on the edge. And I thought in America, I'd always thought that, they were so far advanced in glass technology that you're able to put the glass on the edge without overhangs and eaves to be able to control sunlight. That might be, and of course we can do that to some extent now with glass, with smart glass. But it wasn't then. And so he said, I said, so how do you keep the house warm and how do you keep it cool? He said, well, we air condition it. And I thought, God, he's going to think that I'm a most stupid idiot asking that sort of a question. And I said, do your buildings leak? I could see that they should leak. And he said, no, they don't leak. And I said, well, why don't they leak? He said, because they're air conditioned. And I said, and he said, the pressure inside is greater than the pressure outside, and positive air moves to negative pressure, so I'm pushing the water out all the time. So I thought to myself, that was a turning point in my career, a total turning point. I just got rid of the idea altogether and followed up then, very soon after that, seeing the work of Wright and some of the early Art Nouveau work of architects that was so beautiful, and looking at the work of Coderc, it brought me into a new realm, and this was an incredible change for me. But then visiting the Maison de Verre in Paris and finally becoming a member of the Maison de Verre in Paris by Pierre Chareau was a revelation. Here was modern architecture that was modern when I saw it first time in 1960,
1969, 1972, 73 and 74 period. And I couldn't believe something designed in 1926 was so modern at such a late stage, and it is still such a beautifully modern building. And I realised modern architecture, the tenets of modern architecture, when practiced properly, are relevant today and will be relevant for all time, because it's about a way of questioning about today.
All right, we are going to come back to me, so I'm going to get you on that. But we're going to come by way of the first project in the book, which is the house for Glenn's mother, designed in 1969. Nick, the house for... No. The House for Mother's been a really significant moment in the careers of lots of architects. I'm thinking of the Varna Venturi House or the Rose Seidler House in Australia, mostly, of course, because of the incredible opportunity it offers for the architect to do what they need at that time in their own intellectual development. Tell us about the significance of this house and why it was included.
Well, it was kind of the first one that Glenn did, so it had to be included in many ways. It was obviously a period where you'd just come out of working with Anchor Mortlock, Murray and Woolley, and you wanted to start your own practice. And your mother's house was a wonderful opportunity to do that. So for me, it was a very interesting opportunity to understand those first tentative steps into what would end up being a 55-year career. And in terms of selecting this project, I think it was important to have one at the beginning and then one towards the end, but really the bookend at the beginning really was the house for your mother. What's interesting is there were actually 3 designs done for that house, and I think as a young architect you were obviously labouring over which one to do, and there were various iterations and various options. And one of those projects, there was a model made, and I think that model is with the Powerhouse Museum. And we spoke about that and said, do we want to do this particular iteration of the house? But we did have some other drawings, and I think we both agreed that they were potentially a little more interesting because they started to provide a few clues about Glenn's work, just some little subtleties which you could start to recognise in, I guess, a longer career. So we chose that one in the end. And I guess the key things about that house were it started to look at the elongation. The long pavilion was kind of the diagram. The other interesting thing was the way the roof worked. Now, it was a flat roof back then, and I guess you would never do that these days, but the reason it was a flat roof was to protect the views from your mother's house behind, to keep the views down towards the water. And I think these days you would probably do that in a different way. But back then it was a flat gravel roof. But on the inside, the ceiling actually kicked up at the edges to bring in light and bring in northern light and also the views out towards the south. And so the ideas of prospect and refuge were starting to emerge from this house already. And the other interesting thing were the little windows. There were little windows, there was a couple of windows downstairs, I think there was one upstairs, which were angled to capture a particular view. And that was, I think, a consistent theme of your work, which has really been throughout pretty much every project you've done, but there was a little semblance of that one as well. And it was interesting because when we did it and we built it and we made it and I started to show Glenn some of the images, you said, oh, it's not bad for a young architect, is it? And I think you're right. I think it was a wonderful, wonderful project. And it was lovely to see it almost as though it had been built because it had certain qualities, particularly on its site, which was in Seaforth, with views out over Middle Harbour. And the way the images worked out, the ones done by David Deloy, you feel as though you've actually visited the place now. It's wonderful. So in a sense it has been built, but it was a very important project to do. It was those first tentative steps of a young architect trying to find the truth in his work, having had, I guess, the nuts and berries experience of the Sydney School prior to that, but to step out in a new direction. And it was kind of offering, I think, a glimpse of what the future could be. So I think it was a very important project to include.
So in other writings or talks that you've given about that house, you talk about the desire to cleanse yourself of some of the influence of the Sydney School. And I'm coming back to Mies now, because you talk about, and several times you said, Mies is my conscience. And there's almost a moral imperative to the use of this language and these words. So I'm wondering if you can tell us that what it is that Mies is drawing you towards or away from in this intellectual tussle with him over years.
You know, it's in many pursuits in art. For example, knowing when to stop, knowing what to leave out, knowing what not to put in is very important. And at a given point, simplicity, as we know, embodies complexity. But leaving too much out, we lose the complexity and we end up with simplistic. And I look at the Farnsworth House, and now having visited it twice, and as recently as probably 2.5 months ago again, and this time I was able to see the things that were important to me, and that is the beauty of order, the elegance of proportion, the simplicity of detailing. Now, all of this does not mean good. It means it has a qualitative factor that's very exciting in many ways. To have a white pavilion in a forest or in a landscape with trees and a river in front of it has a beauty about it. And I've been very interested in the junction of the rational and the poetic, that the rational must embody an understanding of being truthful. It must also have that honesty about it in the detailing. And when you have that and you put it together in a particular way that has a superb proportion and has a completeness about it, almost a serene quality, then the poetics come into it. Renzo Piano refers to it when it sings. And I think that's a really important thing. One of the most important, I think, attributes an architect can have is to know when the work the architect designing is not good enough, and to have the ability to pursue it further, or to have a partner who's an architect who will look over your shoulder when one is designing the mosque and say, you can do better than that. And it's exactly what happened. And I did. But sometimes you need a bit of a jolt. And I think those jolts are very, very good. But it is the junction of the poetic and the rational that is important. And the Farnsworth House has, to an extent, that. And in my view, it's probably not complex, in many ways complex enough for me, because it does not have any refuge. It does not have those things. Beautifully detailed, beautifully resolved for where it's gone, and I admire it enormously. So this is not a criticism of the building, it's more a perception for my own learning that I refer to the building as a conscience. So when my building is still messy, I think of the Farnsworth House and say, I've got to take it further to have a feeling of that quality of serenity. Louis Barragan said, any work of architecture that's designed without serenity in mind is, in my view, a mistake. And when serenity possesses joy, it is ultimate.
I want to come back to this idea of the rational and the poetic, because I think through those lenses you've been able to develop the most sophisticated responses to the natural world through architecture. We're in a time where people are interested in an idea of biomimicry as a way to make very direct references between the natural world and architecture. And I'm wondering what you think about that as a response. Biomimicry, the idea that you'd make a very direct translation of the natural world into architecture.
Yeah, look, biomimicry is just a joke. Frank Lloyd Wright did one house in Arizona, and he did roofs that went up like that and down and up like that down, and behind the mountain is doing that as well. And you say to yourself, why the hell are you doing that? You can do better than that, Mr. Wright. Look, it has no place for me whatsoever. However, there's another level that one can look at nature, and it's not biomimicry, but it's taking other levels of nature. And the nature in this country, for example, our landscape is that, on the whole, outside the rainforests, has a fairly tough quality. And the survival of our trees, like many of the eucalypts, the hakeas, many of them, are about lack of water and about tough conditions. But out of that comes the most incredible strength out of the structure. So there's a legibility that comes from this. And that's what you take, is legibility. And there's a delicacy as it goes to the edges. And the leaves are the most feathery thing. They're most beautiful. And some of our eucalypts, in the hottest parts, they turn their leaf in the morning, the edges to the morning sun. And as the day moves, the leaf turns around. And the transpiration is reduced on the tree, but a lot of the light gets onto the trunk. And many of the trees that are like that, the trunks go a very silver white. So the trunks are silver white to reflect the heat and the light, which is so fantastic. And so we start to end up with the idea of delicacy, of strength, of translucency, of transparency, of most beautiful junction between the junction of the branch to the leaf, and understanding the details. So it's not biomimicry, but it's understanding what this tree is doing through the survival in the landscape. And I'm putting buildings in the same landscape, and I've got to do the same sort of survival. And I've got to look at how I reduce the transpiration in my building, in effect, to be able to reduce the amount of heat gain in summertime, or reduce the amount of heating for the wintertime. I don't always achieve it, but I try. And this is where I think it's not biomimicry. It is taking the beautiful quality of our landscape, which is different to the rainforest. It's different to Europe. Our leaves often hang like this. The European leaf moves around like that and puts its face to the sun and wants every bit of sun it can possibly get during the time the sun is there. It's the most wonderful leaf. And the tree is legible in wintertime, but it's not legible in summertime. And also, in our trees, you can look through our trees on one side of a mountain and see right across through our trees to the rocks and the trees on the other side. In Europe, you can't do that. The flora is so dense. We have this beautiful transparency, that distance. You get every stages of the foreground, the middle ground, and the distant ground. It's all available, and the landscape does that. And I'm interested in interpreting those sorts of things, not the biomimicry. No, please. Thank you.
Nick, A lot of attention is focused on Glenn's work on pavilion buildings and pavilion houses, but you've also included the Lindfield House, which is a very different type of house and a very different sort of setting. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yes, the Lindfield House is really interesting. Glenn, you've mentioned a few times in your career you've been to the Land and Environment Court 11 times, and you've won 10 of them. So the Lindfield House is the 11th one, which is the project that wasn't approved. And I thought that was kind of interesting to investigate that one, just to see what that project looked like. And it was, I guess there's a collection of your projects which were very much influenced by your time in Greece, which was effectively the courtyard house. And Lindfield was one of those houses, and you can relate it to, say, the Doan House in many ways, in that it was the very kind of clean white walls and the inward-looking top light design solution. And at Lindfield, the site was fairly nondescript. It was in a fairly kind of suburban area, so it was an inward-looking project. And in a way, you mentioned you wanted it to be a fairly defensive house. But inside, it created this series of lovely courtyards. And there's this quite interesting diagonal slash right through the middle of the project, which is the central corridor, all beautifully top-lit, which was an art gallery space as well. And then this butterfly roof, which then kicked up in two directions to bring light in. Everything was coming in through the top. And in many ways, it related to your time in Greece, I think, as you mentioned, in Mykonos, sitting under the tree, having retsina and fish with that lovely family. I mean, maybe you could describe that experience, Glenn, because that's, I guess, the genius of that particular project really came from that experience.
Yeah. It's the family, the Kusithana family on Mykonos, where I spent almost 6 months during the 1963 period it was. And we were invited to lunch. And the Meltemi was blowing. That's the very strong wind coming from the north, and it's very cold. It was towards October, but the wind was cold coming off Europe. And we went into the courtyard, and the courtyard was just covered in the most beautiful grapevine, and the courtyard walls were just very simple white, and a big table, and there would have been probably 10 of us there, the family, and invited my wife and I there. And on the table were these two fabulous fish and all the fruits and vegetables, and it was the most beautiful thing. And I sat there and I said, this is just an extraordinary experience. Here we are in Greece, in a day that's terrible day with the wind howling outside, and it's so calm. The serenity here is so amazing. And I said, this is architecture. This is what architecture should give us. Places to be, beautiful places to be. And that has remained with me forever.
The Doan House and the Lindfield House are such beautiful exemplars of the courtyard type. And I know that actually recently in some work you're doing with Candelapis Associates, you're actually looking at some denser forms of housing and apartment types. Are you allowed to tell us anything about that sort of work that you're doing now?
With Angelo?
Yeah.
Well, some of you know Angelo. Some of you will know him at different levels. Angelo is a very special person. He has a remarkable mind, totally remarkable. He is able to handle the toughest of tough clients and deal with the nicest of gentle people equally. It's just extraordinary. I am absolutely amazed at what he achieves and what he actually gets built is amazing. I have been working with Angelo now, he tells me today. I was working with Angela today. I'm working with Angelo tomorrow. I work with Angelo all the time. Angela's my new relationship in my work, which is wonderful. And so I think there's something that needs to be perfectly understood, and that is, most people think that I've been a sole practitioner all my career. Now, the reality is, only once have I employed people, and at another time there was an agreement with a type of contract, but on the whole I like to do collaborations, and I find them far more satisfactory. So early on in my career I worked with Alex Zarnes and Wendy Lewin in collaboration in projects, which was a very nice sort of experience. And then Wendy, Reg and I did the Boyd Centre in collaboration. And Wendy and I did some houses in collaboration. And this has been something that's been very important to me. And it was one of the happiest times in my career to be working in that way. And Angelo now I'm working with in the same way. And I've also had people that have assisted us in our work, like the Georgiadis brothers, that's assisted us in the big project with us shown here, which is down at Moonlight Head. Reg assisted me in the museum in Broken Hill. So these are the sort of things that happen. So I've had some assistance, but I prefer the actually collaboration. I like the collaboration. But one of the great problems I've experienced is when the work's done and the publicity comes out, the press loves to put me up there as the author of the work. As recently as only a weekend or two ago, where I was nominated in a certain area of thinking in this country, said that I was the author of the Boyd Centre. Well, I'm not the author of the Boyd Centre, I'm a collaborator in the Boyd Centre, and I don't know how to control this. And it's a terrible thing for people, and particularly women in this country, under the world of the press here, they tend to write them out, and it's a very bad situation. And I try to do things about it. I get very angry about it. The client who put up a house for sale that we both did together, my name came out as the architect for it. I was furious and sent a really very, very stiff text message to the people about it. For not, they promised me it would not go out that way, and it did go that way. I don't like dishonesty. I don't like that happening, but it happens all the time, I'm afraid. I've gone well off the subject.
It's your birthday, you're allowed to.
That's one of my pet subjects.
Look, we're going to move to questions shortly, so the people with microphones will start to move around. Just make yourselves known so that we can launch into that pretty efficiently. But maybe one more project before we do that. And I think the other project I'd like to talk about is the Silver City Mining Museum in Broken Hill. Nick, tell us about that extraordinary response to a hot, arid landscape.
Yeah, the Silver City Mining Museum, it was one of the biggest projects, I think, that you'd done at that stage. And it was a very challenging climate, a very challenging location to put a building. And it had been published, I think, a few times in various magazines and various books, some of the working drawings for that project. And I believe there was a CGI created, I think, for the Biennale one year, which was, there were a couple of views of it. But for me, it was really fascinating because a lot of collateral existed, a lot of drawings and sketches existed, but I never really understood what the building looked like. And I thought it'd be wonderful to actually build this one virtually to see how it looked and how it behaved. And so we built this project in Revit, and what emerged was the most remarkable, expressive building. It was a really incredible design response. And the primary feature of the building were these malcaffs. The malcaffs are, I guess, wind catchers, which really derive from the Middle East, and they were celebrated in the book, Architecture Without Architects. And these elements sought to draw in as many of the moving air elements and the breeze as possible into the project, down through these amazing tubes, into the building, across water, and then to cool the rest of the building as well. And then on top of it, there was this lovely, long, gabled roof structure across the top, which provided a protection for the upper level kind of exhibition areas for the heavy machinery. But it was a building that really, once we'd done this, it was a building that could not have been designed for anywhere else in the world. It was absolutely specific to that local place. And it was done in assistance with Reg Lark, and Reg's beautiful drawings have been included in the book. And by all accounts, Glenn, from our conversations, the building worked remarkably well. It was tested by VIPAC down in Melbourne. They put a smoke bomb test through it, through a model, and it performed perfectly as a cooling device for the project.
Which include, by the way, taking herbs from the desert and crushing them, fresh herbs, in the base of the water, so that as you walk through, you actually got the perfumes of the desert herbs coming through as well.
So this idea of extreme climate launching an incredibly specific and beautiful response. So we're all confronting extreme climate now. Everybody's caught up with you. We're all thinking and talking about this now. But we're seeing this sort of global movement towards the sealing of buildings and the wrapping of buildings and the tight control of air into the buildings so that they can operate at an extreme level of mechanical efficiency. And this is dramatically different to what you did in this museum project. So I'm wondering how you respond to these sort of emerging climatic responses.
Yeah, first of all, our place in Mossman, which was an alteration to a semi, Wendy and I designed, and thankfully it was just before BASICs came in requirement for air sealants. Wendy is a lover of fresh air, much more so than I am. And so we basically have the windows open summer and winter, and day and night. Maybe the living room closes up at night time, but in bedroom the windows, I think, have only been closed probably half a dozen times in 20 years when it's rained very heavily. And we don't want water inside when the water is really heavy coming from the northeast. But there's a real issue ahead. I think we're heading in a very, very, very negative direction. To have buildings totally sealed, there are health issues. Unless we legislate that all finishes to be non-toxic, that we don't have gas inside the houses, cook outside. Cooking's got toxins. The oven's going to put out toxins. There's fat that's cooked that have toxins. It's terribly unhealthy. And I am very surprised that the medical profession hasn't attacked the architectural profession for this whole area of tightly sealed buildings where you get full marks if no air escapes or no air gets in, and you can mechanically adjust the air to inside. Now, what we do know is that the human body in every area, including cones and rods of the eyes, need to be exercised, and to actually have air that's cool in parts of the house and it's warmer in other parts of the house, and our body needs to be able to be exercised in the change in thermal performance. The idea of having the same temperature in a room throughout the day, year in, year out, in my view, is a cop-out as a human in the way we live. I think it is a total failure of our ability to live on this planet. And I think that time has come where I think as a group of architects, we must start to absolutely put a stop to what is going in a direction that's really negative. I think I've stated my position.
Time for questions. Has anybody got a question? Oh, come on. Oh, there's one here.
Thank you, that was lovely. Glenn, your work is very much rooted in place. Are there any particular places in Australia that you have a real affinity to, something almost kind of religious is not the right word, but I know there's a few places I've been in Australia and you just feel something in those places. They're so special and so spiritual. Are there any places like that for you?
Glenn, so the question is, are there any particular places in Australia that you've been that have particularly moved you? What are your favourite sort of places in Australia?
What, buildings or places?
Places. Natural places.
Oh. Yes, indeed. There are several. Going 2-hour drive west of Kempsey up into the Wilson River Primitive Reserve is so beautiful. So beautiful. The cleanest, clearest water. No farms, the headwaters, down waterfalls dropping 8 metres, 9 metres, water moving over beautiful smooth rocks. Oh, it's God's place, honestly. So beautiful. But Kakadu is another incredible place. And Aboriginal Australia up in Northern Territory, up in the Dighton country, up inland from Cape Tribulation, there are some amazing landscapes that are the areas of huge rocks and great cave paintings, and the most beautiful paintings by Aboriginal people, maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands of years old. Are so remarkable. So Northern Australia, right across from Western Australia, across Northern Territory and across Queensland, that upper part is just totally remarkable. But so are parts of Tasmania. I did the walk, for example, in Tasmania in 1962 from Derwent Bridge up through Cradle Mountain, and it was a 10-day walk, and that landscape is another remarkable landscape, going through the most beautiful changes from mountain landscapes to lakes. Honestly, there's some most beautiful parts in this country. But, you know, Sydney Harbour's pretty good too. You look at Sydney Harbour, or look at Middle Harbour. The actual harbour itself is extraordinarily beautiful. Or go to North Head and look at the landscape back up into the city. It's really superb. I mean, there are so many parts of this place that I just love. I think this is a remarkable place. And I think that the rainforests are equal to anywhere in the world. Our rainforests are so beautiful, and what a tragedy that we've lost a number of them, not just through logging, but also those bushfires of 2019, 2020, that went into the rainforests as well and destroyed them, and the 500 years lost in many ways there. And of course, there are landscapes that we're not allowed to go to. For example, where the Wallamai pine has been discovered. That's another landscape with plants that's like discovering a family of dinosaurs. How remarkable is that, to be living in a country where there are plants that have been discovered that thought had gone tens of thousands of years ago. We had fossils they found fossils of the Wallamai pine, I think it was down in Antarctica, and And here we've got them growing, as a family, and they've now found, I think they've got quite a number of them they've found now in the same area. It's just remarkable. Yes, there are many landscapes in Australia I love.
We need another hour for that question. Any other questions from the floor? Oh.
Bit of a basic question, but out of all of the not finished projects, which one was your favourite?
I know this is a tricky question. The next one. But that's not an answer for you. Look, the short house at Kempsey, I really very much like being with. The Simpson Lee house, I very much like being with. And I try and design buildings that if I should ever wish to own any of them, I'd be very happy to have them, but they are for my clients. And fortunately, my clients have been so wonderful. I have had and continue to have the most wonderful, wonderful Australian clients any architect could possibly wish to have. But those are the houses. And I think the collaboration with Reg and Wendy for the Boyd Centre is another building that I think we took to a level that is a level that I think is a reasonable piece of architecture. And I have to say that I believe it's been compromised by what has taken place since. But I say no more.
I think we've got time maybe for 2 more questions. Wave those arms.
Hello, Glenn. With the future being so uncertain in so many ways, I was wondering if you could spare a few words for any aspiring architects.
For inspiring architects? Young architects, yes. I'll give you some statements that I was given by my father that drove me really quite hard. He said to me, well, first of all, to let you know, I was raised on the philosophy of Henry David Thoreau. Things like the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Their resignation is confirmed desperation. These are the sort of things that I think that are really important. There are many other quotes that I could give you of Thoreau, and I'd like to give you the one that is probably the one that's been highly influential in terms of my thinking, and that is, the quote is, "Since most of us spend our lives doing ordinary things, the most important thing is to carry them out extraordinarily well." Now, I think that's really important. My father added to that, I might tell you, and he said, and be able to go to the beach where nobody knows who you are. So what he was saying is that your life is not about doing an architecture that's got flashing lights on it all the time. Quietness is very important. To do things with restraint, to be able to know when to pull back is very important. To know when it's over the top, don't allow it to happen. Know when it's not good enough. Another thing my father gave me was, he said, you must remember, son, now that you're entering practice, you must start off the way you would like to finish. And know this, he said, with every compromise you knowingly make in your work, now that's not about arrogance, It's about doing something that you know you're capable of doing better, or you're producing something less than you're capable of. That's what the compromise is. And then he added, and when that compromise is built, that represents your next client. So for young architects, tough life in the beginning. I, at certain stages, could not re-register my car. It had to go up in the blocks at one stage for 3 months. I caught buses to sites. I was so embarrassed that I got off the bus, the stop before, and walked to the site so that the builder didn't see I was coming by bus to the site. These are the sort of things that you've just got to try and pursue. And to learn to hang on when things are tough, hang on, because you can hang on. It's very easy to give up, not so easy to hang on. But the important thing is to pursue the idea of excellence. And Thoreau says that is incredibly important, to do ordinary things extraordinarily well, I think, is what's important. You're not out there to change the world. I never set out for any of that. All I wanted to do is just do things well. And that's all that you need to do, is to do them well. Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. And I lied, there wasn't time for two, there was time for one question. So look, I'm going to have to bring this to an end. Thank you so much for coming this evening. Glenn and Nick will still be available to talk to out in the foyer, because they're going to sign books for you. So anybody who hasn't bought a copy of this really important and beautiful publication, you have time to remedy that right out the back just as we finish. But can I say, can you all join me in thanking very much Glenn Murcutt and Nick Sissons?